So thank you everyone for finding or going back to your seat. I know it's difficult to stop the conversation, but I promise you'll have some more time during the lunch break and in the evening. So as you could see, we rearranged the stage slightly to give room for an exciting panel discussion on the future of pro bono, and it will be followed by a Q&A session. So if you have any burning questions, just take a note of that and just bombard our speakers after the panel discussion. The discussion, which will be led by Joel, thank you very much. And the participants are Antoine, from co-founder and consultant at Pro Bono Lab in France, Elizabeth Schwan-Rosenwald, Chief External Relations Officer at Taproot Foundation from the States, Lorhan Caproni from Brazil, co-founder of Phomenta, and Narinder, Dhami, Managing Director of LEAP, the Center for Social Impact from Canada. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Welcome back. I was so happy to have this happen because there was no way that you were going to have me answer all the questions from what I was saying earlier. So it's really valuable to have people who've been in the fields for a while and can really share very diverse but compelling stories about their work, how they see the field, what they see are the challenges and the great opportunities ahead. So let me ask you to just briefly introduce your organizations that you're affiliated with. Do you want to start, Antoine?
So I'm Antoine from Pro Bono Lab, based in France. And you can see Pro Bono Lab team, 3 people at the end of the room.
Thank you.
Narinder from LEAP. We are the Pico Center for Social Impact, a partnership of 5 corporates, so BCG, Ernst & Young, Hill & Knowlton, and then 3 Canadian companies I imagine you don't know. So.
Hi, I'm Lorhan from Brazil, a co-founder of Phomenta. We use pro bono as a core engine of acceleration and incubation of nonprofits.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth with the Taproot Foundation. You've heard a little bit about Taproot so far, but Taproot was founded with the idea that if every social change organization had access to the pro bono resources that they need, we could see real change, and that's what we continue to work on in a number of different ways today.
Great. As a way to get to know each of you, we're going to spend a little time here on stage together. Tell us about your very first touch with pro bono, and what has changed? Do you feel has been the biggest change since that experience? Do you want to?
Sure. So my first experience with pro bono was in 2010. I was working with a donor, a fellow named Joseph Rotman. If anyone is Canadian, they'd be versed with the Rotman School of Management out of the University of Toronto. And he wanted to start up a microfund. And I'd just come back from a few years of working in microfinance abroad. Well-connected, intelligent, wealthy individual connected me to an array of individuals wanting to give their advice and their pro bono. At the time, it was a one-person organization. I was trying to build an idea, build an organization, and was absolutely overwhelmed by the support I was getting. But it was support that was very much transactional and very much an hour here and 2 hours there. And the biggest lesson I learned from that experience was the value of a holistic approach to pro bono. So when you're a small nonprofit in particular, you're running around doing everything. It's a startup space. And the more the support that comes from the corporate sector that is framed in a holistic, comprehensive way, the better you can absorb that and actually utilize all of the skill sets you have in front of you. So that was my first entry into pro bono, working with as a client of pro bono. Learned a lot and actually think a lot about that as we structure our organization today and work with our partners.
Great, thank you.
I can
go for it.
I can jump in. So back in 2008, before I had joined Taproot Foundation, I was working for a small chamber ensemble. And we had a volunteer who essentially walked in our door and said, I love chamber music. I'm so committed to chamber music. I want to help. How about I build you a database where you can store all of your recordings online for future use? Sounds fantastic, right? Except now I would say, well, do you actually need that? Do you know how you're going to market that? What's the value add to the organization? But at the time, oh, okay, someone wants to do something for us for free? Awesome. So he spent somewhere between 6 and 9 months. He was in our office 2 days a week building this database. Once he built it, we thanked him. He was pleased. He left. I imagine the database is still sitting somewhere online. No one knows how to use it. No one knows how to leverage it. It's just sitting there. So what I learned from that experience, and what Taproot has really taught me, is scope the project first. What do you need? What are you going to get? What's the final deliverable? And never accept help because someone walks through your door. Only accept help when you say, this is what I need, this is how I need it, and this is when I need it. Can you provide that? Great. If not, you know what, thank you, but I don't want your time to be wasted either.
Okay, thank you. Antoine?
So when I discovered Pro Bono, I was a student in a business school with Johan, and we were looking on social matters because we thought it was so much more interesting than traditional business matters, so much more complex, so much more challenging, and so much more learning for us than what we were learning in this business school that is, according to Financial Times, ranking the first business school in Europe. But we were bored in class, really. And we were really having fun when we were going to the nonprofit field and learning so much. And that's how we learned management, I think engagement, a lot of things, not in the classroom, but being in the nonprofits and doing stuff as students. So that's how I think we wanted to create a company that was going to provide trainings through nonprofit engagement. And that's how we came to start serving what was happening in the world, and we discovered Pro Bono and Deloitte Studies and Taproot and Points of Light. And we said, okay, let's do an internship in the US and learn about what is Pro Bono, and then we can bring it back to France. I think, Joel, your question was what has changed since this first experience with Pro Bono? So it was in 2010. At the time, there were 3 social entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurial project in HEC out of 2 years. Right now, there are 10 or 12 social entrepreneurship projects every year. At the time, no one knew what Pro Bono was in France. You would say the word, 0% of the population would know. Right now, I can't remember the exact figures, but we are close to 20%. So many things have changed. At the time also, I think there was a huge idea on how can nonprofit integrate the business practices to be stronger. But what really happened in the last 6 years is that businesses integrated nonprofit practices and got stronger, developing visions, social, things and everything. So that's what happened in the last 6 years. So, yeah,
great, thank you.
I will share a personal story. It's my first experience with Pro Bono wasn't with social sector. I'm not the kind of guy who likes to paint walls to help. I always wanted to look for a way to get more impact. Living that way, when I was 20 years old, 15 kilos thinner than that. I just dropped out from college after graduation and to help in my family company. And it's a small business, and the small business have a lot in common with nonprofits, same management trouble. And I told my father, give me some days to roll out your numbers and see, and say, okay, do that because we are growing. I discovered that we were 90 days from bankruptcy. So totally different scenario. And after that, I need to do something. 20 years old, no experience at all. And I was taking my master's in administration. So I called my teachers and created a committee with them to help me. I don't have money, you need to do that pro bono. And thanks to that, we could save this company. And then I realized how can be impactful to give this opportunity to other organizations, because a company can hire the services, consultancy, but what impact then you can have. So now it makes sense for me. It's by the first experience I have the contact and saw this opportunity that can help. So really good, skilled time gives a really transformational reality. I felt that on my skin. So now I'm really happy to provide that to other organizations.
Great, thank you. In my role, my most recent role at Taproot Foundation as the head of Global Pro Bono, I got a chance to travel all over the globe and work with amazing people and to not just spark the idea of pro bono, but also to listen to the voices and the priorities that were unique to each country. And I found it fascinating, very anthropological in that way, but also just amazing to see how pro bono can flourish given completely different contexts, economies, societal norms. So I'm inviting you to be completely bold and make bold statements as if you are representing your entire society. Tell us about something unique about pro bono in your country. Who'd like to jump on that one first?
We have two names for pro bono and a lot of other names. We distinguish in France, so we distinguish pro bono that's on working hours and off working hours. It's just not the same name. So when we came with the approach of pro bono as an umbrella, we had this problem like, you are nothing and you want to be an umbrella, things like this. So this was quite unique. Another thing that is unique in France is that the public funding represents 50% of the fundings of the non-profits. If you add all the public fundings like Europe, central government, local governments, and the role of the state in France is I think different than in many other countries. It's much more present, and also in the mindset, people rely on the state a lot to make sure that we pursue general interest as a society. We don't believe that adding individual interest makes general interest. We believe that there must be some kind of structure to make sure that the society works in the way of general interest, and that's it.
Okay, great, thank you. Narinder?
So in Canada, and actually we met about 2 years ago with a few of your colleagues from BMW and Taproot, who really kicked off a more national conversation on pro bono. That was something that wasn't happening in the past, but thanks to one of our largest foundations, the McConnell Foundation, they gathered a collective of individuals. And I think what's exciting is that we're seeing a growth in that. And what our role now is, as like many of us, all of us sit on the Global Council, is how do we take that energy that we're seeing across the world, and I see it in Canada, and mobilize it in a global way. So what's really exciting is the energy, the commitment we're seeing from foundations and corporates, and then what the opportunity is, how do we channel that in a way that's global? And I think there's a lot of interest. So I think Canada gets a really positive reputation in a lot of ways of being inclusive and diverse, and this just adds to that kind of oneness and collectiveness of what we're trying to do in terms of driving social impact.
And I just add that it was amazing to look at as they were about to turn 150 years old of what should their society be about. And pro bono could be a part of that language. And thanks, can I have your president? But amazing reputation and value of, and approach in really looking at that. It was reminiscent of India. India at 75 took a look at what should civil society look like. And pro bono is this amazing a way of capturing all of these different priorities and threads in a single name or activity.
And there was actually just an IPIS Read survey that came out that showed that more individuals, I think it increases about 6 basis points in terms of their view of corporates that do good and wanting to work there. So that's increasing in Canada, and also the way Canadians purchase. There was an increase of a similar amount in the way people purchase. Again, if a corporate is doing good and is seen to be a good citizen, and pro bono is such an incredible component of that. So we're seeing that growth and that interest.
Great, thank you. Lorhan?
I can list 3 things that happened in Brazil that I saw that some things helped, others don't. first of that is the lack of trust in nonprofits. As you know, we are unfortunately really famous for corruption, and this applies to NGOs too. So we had to create a safe framework to show companies that these nonprofits are safe. You can work with them. The second one is about the names. Like pro bono in Brazil, guys thinking about law, the lawyers doing pro bono and something like that. That's it. So we created a board for a company with guys from most of them CEOs or from marketing industry and everything, and asked them, how can we make pro bono sexy? That's the point. How we can speak their language. And then now, as I starting speaking a company about, let's create a pro bono program with a ready product to show the framework that will develop people and everything. Say, no, don't want. And now I sit with them and say, do you want to be part of acceleration program for nonprofits? Oh yeah, that's amazing. And that's the same product. It's only a matter to speak what is the language. I think in corporations we have always a sponsor, a person that believes, but there's this difficult to sell this internally. And it's our role to show how we can frame that, because when people see that, potential is great, and it has clearly deliverables. And the other thing this is something that really blew my mind, like a huge company in Brazil, multinational, created a process for trainees. So it was 50,000 applicants to 30 spots. So 6 months process, and after that, 3 of them gave up on the final interview because the company has no social responsibility at all. Can you imagine that? And if this starts running, and this is starting, we have a new generation concerned about that. So this helped us a lot too in Brazil. Companies are saying, okay, now we need to think about different ways to create impact in this environment for this new generation. So these are most the trends that help us, some are not.
Okay, good, thank you. And not that I want to put a plug in for a competing session tomorrow morning to mine, but Elizabeth will be doing a session on making pro bono. Oh, is it pro bono sexy?
It's communicating impact, but I like making pro bono sexy. That's
Okay.
That's a better way to phrase it.
Okay.
So there we go.
All right.
You might have heard it's a kind of interesting time in the U.S. right now. Few things are off. And what's fascinating, I mean, the U.S. has never provided governmental funding in any large way to support societal issues. We've always had a nonprofit sort of arm of how we support our communities. Increasingly right now, that any support coming from the government is decreasing. And so what we're seeing, and what is fascinating, is watching companies step up to not just provide their own employees, but to say, no, we're going to lead on social issues. We are going to be the moral compass of the country, which is an interesting moment in time. And as a result, more and more companies are saying, we are going to be the moral leaders, and as such, our people are going to be right there with us. We are going to look forward on what's ahead. So there's a lot of opportunity, but it's also a little bit of a, well, where is this going to go? Because with the current government structure that we have, it's a challenging time. So we shall see.
Great. So let's start giving people some ideas. Who'd like to go first with what are you most excited about for the future of pro bono?
I can go. 2 things. I think one for thinking with corporations. We started co-creating with some corporations what I think is a really interesting program, because it's really connected to a strategic creation of value and sharing of value. This started with a small nonprofit that works with children and has programs with their mothers of their children to produce like shirts and clothes at all. Okay, but the nonprofit is depending on the government to getting funding, etc. And then we created a program to use pro bono to prepare this nonprofit to become a supplier of this company. So everything gets connected. You know, they were struggling to sell 100 T-shirts, and they can produce a lot, but they can sell. It's like they don't know how to do that. We're selling 100 shirts per year. The first drop was 5,000, because a huge company. They say by the end of the year, and so how they get them prepared for that? Okay, let's use our own employers to prepare them and create all the environment they need. So when this started, the corporations could engage their employees in something that have a clear deliverable by the end, and starting a big shared value, because I put a non-profit in my chain of value right now. I'm really changing this process, and I prepare this non-profit for that. So this for me is something that gets me really excited, because when this happened, Pro Bono became strategic for the company, the center of the core, what they need to do. So that's one of the dimensions. There are other I can talk later, please.
Yes, I'd like to build on it. I think I was about to say I'm really excited about the growing integration of Pro Bono to HR practices at any stage of the HR development on the recruitment. So we do Pro Bono program with campuses. On the learning and development, we integrate Pro Bono programs in corporate universities or in talent development programs, like high potential programs. So this is growing and growing and growing, and I know in the US it's really developed now.
Absolutely.
So, but more widely, I think it's the integration of Pro Bono and nonprofits in the value chain of the enterprises. We are trying to lead a study with a think tank in France that basically tries to collect data on how the value chains and the value chain strategies of the companies are changing with the digital era, and what is the value of the nonprofits in these value chains. And I think it's really that, that's really exciting. Like we are integrating the value chain. We are in the HR department now. We have a room, but soon it will be not just the HR department, but maybe like all the value chains of the corporations that can be, enriched, I would say, enriched with Pro Bono. Second thing is I'm very excited about is the global Pro Bono network and the collaboration, international collaboration about Pro Bono. I think it's important to mention that here. We learn a lot through these events, and there are many things that we can do and want to do for some of us to go further. So I'm really excited about this, and if you know me, you know this too. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Building on that, I really think more and more we're seeing Pro Bono as something that's not coming from top down, but that's coming from the employees. That is really becoming a way of someone saying, I want to invest in my community. I want to be part of something larger than myself. And so what we're seeing is a growth of and a change of what civic engagement is defined as. Because when you have a pro bono engagement, when you have your nonprofit executive and you have your corporate professional, you have shared learnings. You have an expertise that's coming from both sides of the equation. And suddenly you're able to understand and engage and change things in entirely new ways. So it's really inspirational to see how pro bono is leading into a new definition of civic engagement. And I think it's going to continue to grow and continue to be a critical component for how we address the challenges facing all of our communities.
And I'll add to that with my engineering hat on technology. So, the opportunity of technology to enable the work that intermediaries do, to enable the work that corporates do, and then how the charities are supported is huge and fairly untapped. I think there's some great initiatives Taproot and others have started across the world to get the ball rolling, but there's such an opportunity there when we think of disruption in this space and how we can, we're all very small at some level organizations doing this work of the connecting and the mobilizing. Both through technology and through platforms, we can enable so much more. And so that's what's really gets me excited.
Oh, good. And mentioning you're an engineer just reminded me, can you tell us about the ring on your finger?
Yeah, does anybody know about the ring? Canada? Okay, well, yeah, okay, that's the one. But so in Canada, all engineers wear a ring, a pinky ring, and we're not sure if it's a myth or not, but apparently a bridge was built The engineers didn't calculate the right force linked to the materials on the bridge. The bridge collapsed, people died, and so we were a part of that iron, or now I think it's other pieces of iron, it's called our iron ring, to ensure that in everything we do, we're thinking about the broader implications of our work, so our design. So in Canada, and actually in Silicon Valley, you'll see a lot of people with these pinky rings because they represent Canadian engineers.
Thank you.
Kind of a nice little feel-good story, social consciousness implied in everything we do.
Yeah. Let me see a show of hands. For how many of you you're just starting out with pro bono? Okay. How many have been doing it for about a year? A year or less. 5 years? You guys too. 10 years.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to throw a curveball.
We would expect nothing less, Joel.
Imagine pro bono is a person, ages 0 to 100, because doing pro bono, it's like it keeps you young for a long time. How old is pro bono now? What age would you give it?
20.
Why?
Pro bono, I would say, is an adult. It is, but it's an adult with a little bit of a newness to it. I think that it's established as a value add. It's established as going out into the world. I think much the way a 20-year-old is, and I have to say that I'm speaking from an American perspective here because I'm thinking about 20 as you're sort of halfway through college and you're an adult, but likely your parents are still paying your college bills. So there's this mixture of I'm on my own, except I kind of have this safety net. So we're not out in the world yet. We're not running full speed. We don't have wisdom necessarily, but we've got a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, and we are ready to go.
So I would put a little bit younger than that because we still talk about our definition. So who are we? So when you're 16 or 17, you're thinking about who are you, like what do you want to do, what do you want to be. And I think we're somewhere in the middle. Like I think we've done so much work to move forward in that direction. Sometimes we get confused on what is pro bono and the scope, and we kind of get caught up on that. And as we age, I think we'll just become stronger and more inclusive in that.
I would say 28.
28.
That's very specific.
Very specific.
There's a why. I think pro bono is out of the world. It has started earning its own money, and it's now the time to make choices. So it is still exploring the different identities it could take, but it knows that it's time to buy an apartment. It's time to do the stuff that are going to last. So it has already made like professional experiences, not just teenage experiences.
Yeah.
But it's time to like settle for good and know what he's going to do in the next 10 years. So
Excellent.
Yeah, I agree with Antoine. I think, but I'll give 30s, like in 30 crises, It's, I think just like that. You need to think, how can I go for now and do things? So I think in the middle of this movement, we have energy, still have energy, less than the 20s, but a little bit more maturity because we learned from some mistakes from the 20s to 30s. But now we are thinking what we need to do. I think that's it.
Okay. So one of the engineers out there wanted to figure out the mean of all of those ages.
Not today.
Thank you. Good on your toes. So the future of high quality pro bono at scale throughout societies is in the future. But there's this wall. There's this big honking wall to scale over. Give it a name. What would you call that wall that you have to climb to get to that Shangri-La?
I would call education. I explain. I have a Phomenta, this non-profit, but I founded another company that works artificial intelligence. So I'm trying to create a balance and integrate technology. But I think what really concerns me is a really debate between deepness of impact against the scale. You can exchange one for another. And in Brazil, I saw this happen a lot of times, not only social, but I work in other social entrepreneurs company, and I see that it starts losing some quality on scale. And I think the key to make both happen is education. We need to really create experience for both sides that everyone is using to really understand why, how, and when should I do step by step to make that happen. Create everything, remove this obstacle, yeah, thank you. Through education, I think for me is the key. This is the name of this wall.
So linked to that, I would say awareness. So different but linked, and I think the more people are aware of the potential of pro bono, how it makes both sides feel when you have the right fit and the right readiness on the nonprofit and the for-profit side, and what it can do in terms of transformative impact, co-creation. I think the more we're versed with the potential and the more we get excited, I think the faster the movement will build.
And to jump on that, I'm going to say puppies.
Similar.
Large puppies. And now I'm going to explain. Oftentimes when I will talk to my staff or I will talk to our stakeholders, I will say if I just had kittens and puppies and small babies, I could sell pro bono to anyone. But we don't. What we have instead are incredible impact stories. So if we can look at those puppies and say those are really adorable puppies, but let's talk about where we're going. And let's move past the puppies. Let's move past the desire for puppies. I'm actually a dog person, so I really love puppies. But I would say let's acknowledge that puppies are adorable, but they're also messy and they're annoying and they chew on everything. Think about what else we can do.
Right.
I had different answers, and you mentioned short-term vision in your speech, so I'm not going to come back on it, but I would say despair. Pro bono is a very, very optimistic movement. We're trying to do something positive. We're trying to build something, and you can only do this when you have hope. A lot of people have less and less hope when it comes to matters such as the environment and global warming, and at some point, instead of like building things, they will start breaking things. So I would say this is the world. We need to keep hope, and we need to fight against despair.
Okay. Right.
Only I think about awareness is for me as a part of education. It's like I don't know, when we start in the industry, we have this impression that everyone knows all the terms that we use. Yeah. And I suddenly was got one day because my uncle called me, and we were talking and say, your grandma asked me what you do. Oh man, I gave up and told her you sell drugs. That's the only explanation. I have no idea what you do. And then we created something to help us trying to base the speech. It's called My Grandmother. So when you start to create some campaign or some message to raise awareness, we'd say, okay, it's done. Okay, let's call my grandmother and explain to her. If she understands, that's great. Now we have a campaign to show them with all these terms and everything, because you get to the public and say, okay, let's do pro bono with a design, a framework for everything, social impact measurement. Say, what? So we need to be careful about that. Otherwise, this wall will get bigger and bigger for us.
Yeah. So I threw out the idea of Amazon, like what if it were that ingrained? Tell us, if you could, like what would be your vivid description of something that would be happening in that, the future that you would like for pro bono? Like what would be that, sort of that proof that we've arrived? And I don't know what age person that would be yet.
So I always think about, and maybe it's not the right moment in the world to say this, but at least if I take a Canadian lens, this idea of joining the military or the army is not something folks talk about. But it's about, I think you mentioned the civic, like your civic duty becomes to give back via your skill set. So kind of reshifting what it means to be a citizen from, I think, how much we respect and kind of focus on military and that as kind of your service to your country. A beautiful, I think, vision of a much more collective future would be to think about pro bono as that way that you're civically engaged.
Anyone else?
For me, the definition of we're here is like when I get to somebody here and ask, okay, what do you do? And the person gives me two answers. I work at GE and I do pro bono for a nonprofit. It's
Yeah.
normal. This
Yeah.
is a normal answer. And
Exactly.
this, for me, is the definition of success.
Yeah, I agree. I would say the same. It's having several activities, the normal business life and your other life, and considering that this is your work, both of them. That pro bono is fully integrated into the work concept.
Yep. Who you are is both what brings home the paycheck and also how you're invested in society. Absolutely.
Great. So before we turn the floor over to everyone, some final statement, comment, some things you want to make sure you want to put out in the air for people to chew on before we get into questions.
I'll jump in there. I think, however old pro bono is, I think it's an interesting moment in the movement because the way in which we think about professions and careers and work is changing. And so we haven't quite figured out how pro bono is going to be leveraged across all NGOs, but at the same time, we actually have to change how we think about pro bono because work is changing. And so having to build the airplane while we're in the sky is something that I think at Taproot we do a lot of, maybe too much of, but is a moment in the pro bono movement, which I think we're having right now, which is we're not, fully launched yet, and we have to reevaluate what things look like.
I don't have a statement. I just have an invitation to everyone to participate to the Global Pro Bono Network activity and structuration. So you know that we've been structuring the movements with the Global Pro Bono Network. It's a work under process, I would say. And well, first, it's extremely funny, the meetings we have, and it's extremely interesting. And second, I think is very impactful. So there is room in the movement, there is room in the network for people to basically just take the lead.
Yeah. And I'll say that, linked to that, we're launching this, essentially a partners council for corporates, and it's a way to get corporates together and be much more inclusive of the movement. So there's this really great initiative that will bring us all closer together in a more unified way. And I'll just add that what I at least see in Canada is because we work across legal, BCG strategy, so management consulting, EY, which is across our various groups, and other sectors, it's that cross-sectoral support and connection that has been our secret sauce. And so, the more I think at a global level we collaborate between the GEs and the KPMGs of the world, I think the bolder and the more impact we can drive.
I'll talk about technology. I think there's a publication, I think you can see in the link about a white paper made by Taproot and WM Foundation. I really recommend the reading of this because we have a technology fever all the time. Yeah, like I'm working in an artificial intelligence company, and people imagine like Jarvis and the Iron Man, like everything intelligent and this. No, we don't have that. And there's no such thing. But what concerns me is like we can't forget that technology is a tool. It's not technology for technology itself. And sometimes we make a big mess about that, thinking that we'll solve everything. So I recommend this paper because the first thing to do is listen and work with nonprofits and like a customer-centric orientation. Let's understand their problem. There's no use to sit down with the nonprofit and say, oh, there's a problem in my commercial process. Okay, put a sales force and that's done. That's no work like that. So I think we need to get this deep understanding, because that will be great opportunities. There's a paper from Accenture showing that artificial intelligence will not increase the GDP. You change the way it would be calculated. It's expected to the United States to grow 4 times in 20 years. Everything's going to change. We need to think about the implications of that. But all the time, careful to use technology as a tool, not the solution itself.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists, and we'll be moving into the questions. So you don't get off.
Yes, and the way we move into questions is we will have 2 mics, so maybe we have to steal one of yours, sorry. And we do our fitness exercise, so you've got that side of the room and I got this side of the room. So if you could just put your hand up if you have a question and wait till the mic gets through so that everyone can hear the question. And if you could just introduce yourself and say where you're from so that our speakers also get to know you a bit. So, who's first? Hands up.
It's always hard to be the first one. It seems in international groups as well. What happens if the NGOs are not prepared to have pro bono? I mean, this is a highly hypothetical situation, of course. But try to imagine that there are some countries where, you know, there are all these offering. Maybe we will scale pro bono in Hungary, and we'll have 50 companies ready to give, and maybe just a few dozens ready to receive. So what about the capacity of the NGO sector?
I'll jump in there because absolutely. I believe that it is our job as the intermediaries, or even as the corporates, to consider the readiness of the NGO as part of our responsibility in a successful pro bono engagement. That means training, that means listening, that means support in getting them ready. Because at the end of the day, if the NGO is ready, the project will be a success and the professional and the corporation will feel empowered. If the NGO is not ready, it's not a success for anyone. That said, I think you're always going to have more professionals interested in doing pro bono than nonprofits. I think that's good. I think that's a good balance of supply and demand.
Again, only hypothetically, I never saw the situation before. That's why we exist. We working the whole time to create frameworks to prepare the nonprofits to make that happen. And then we can get the professionals and deliver a good solution for everybody, because it's all about the experience. We need to create a good experience for the nonprofits and for the pro bono consultant. And then I remember that a company, a car manufacturer called me to a meeting, and they started like, okay, we called you because you know how to produce cars only. And we are pretty good doing that. And we tried to do a pro bono here, and then we discovered how good we were producing cars. So everyone gets some specialty. That's why this network is all about. Intermediaries around the world who is creating framework and thinking 24/7 in better ways to prepare the nonprofits to get this talent, skills, and really deliver the impacts that we all want.
And I would say that there was an amazing moment at one point in Taproot's history, and where we were only doing pre-scope projects. That meant that we were being highly selective of who could take advantage of our services. The moment we started diagnosing and actually converting, instead of Taproot staff being responsible for diagnosing, we created a whole field of pro bono experts who were the diagnosticians, they were the troubleshooters, they were the advisors, mentors, coaches. And it created a new form and value proposition of value chain of pro bono that preceded the delivery, the completion. And basically created a pathway of building not just a diagnostic of like getting to what's really needed to be done, but it built the trust, the rapport, the relationship to move forward because times would get tough. And the last part I would spend a lot of time with nonprofit execs around is vivid description of your future self. NGOs have limited bandwidth and time and attention, so they could crash and burn if they spent all this time on something that wasn't really valuable. And a lot of volunteerism is the complete opposite of value. So they should come in cautiously. But to get them to envision and describe their future state, being empowered by this solution, helps them lock onto that and be able to get from here through the minefields to that future state.
I would rephrase it shortly. If the nonprofit is not ready to receive a pro bono project, then you tailor a pro bono project to make them ready. So that's the diagnosis. So then you have an infinity of potential pro bono projects.
Our one learning has been checking out the receptivity of nonprofits to advice. So we actually work with BCG in our diligence phase and test out some scenarios of future strategy or growth ideas and see how the executives, the EDs react to that. So before we dig deep into our long engagements, we have a good sense of will it be successful. So diagnosis, diligence is so critical. And that's how we solve for picking the right organizations to work with.
Another quick comment would be if you have limited the organizations you're trying to benefit are limited, and that's your restraining piece, broaden who you will work with. Work with community-based small businesses, like small business owners in the community. That can be even more so about building a healthy economy than it is working in some nonprofits. Think about working with benefit corporations. Think about working on a pure issue area as opposed to having a specific client where it's about the larger sphere, the way VMware did with the report of thinking about how can we help create a way for an entire industry, all of technology, to show up around pro bono. So there, just think about what the demand side could be and liberate yourself from a traditional NGO model. I was just in Oslo, a very healthy society. They're working with a lot of international beneficiaries, and that's a way to also expand your impact.
Sorry. Hi everyone, I'm Johan. I'm co-founder of Pro Bono Lab with Antoine and Emily, and I now work for the French government to develop volunteering, developing a web platform to connect volunteers with opportunities in the public sector and in the non-profit sector. And I see a major issue that we should face collectively to be sure that pro bono can thrive, is that the public authorities, at least in France, sees pro bono opportunities as potential jobs. And the problem that we face, if I want to have pro bono opportunities on the platform, which I have now, but I know that it cannot be developed massively if we do not face this problem, because the media, every time they see a pro bono opportunities that is quite to say boosted by the state, they see that as a way of the state to reduce public expenses and finally do not offer public jobs or support non-profit sector to create jobs to do their work. So this is something I have to face, and I'm very, very, very small as compared to all the lobbying that can be made around that. So I just want to ask you, do you face this problem in your own country? And if you had a solution, how did you make it? And another example is with civic engagement for the youth. So volunteers, you know, like national service. The media are always saying when they see opportunities for young people that are requiring skills, they see that it cannot be a volunteer opportunity because it should be an internship or a job. So it's excluding pro bono opportunities. And I really think we should be looking at this problem. Thank you.
So we don't have that problem in Canada. in terms of having folks think that pro bono replaces jobs or will take away jobs. So we're fortunate in that. We do have some regulation on volunteering, full-time volunteering, if it's deemed to be similar to a job description, you can get in some legal issues. So we have some issues, but it hasn't been an obstacle for us. And then your second question was around, sorry, I'm blanking. Your second question was, can you repeat that?
Youth movement, youth positions.
Oh, youth position. It's interesting because when you think about the internship idea, and I think the argument that folks will have against that is what the Ford Foundation talks a lot about, is when you don't pay, so when it's pro bono, you segment that to a group of privileged individuals. And that's a counter I hear a lot when it comes to pushing youth into pro bono versus internships, because only a segment of the population are privileged enough to not have to earn and support their day-to-day. But again, we've not incurred that even in a youth level. I think we've been fortunate in the Canadian sense that the conversation's there, but it hasn't been an obstacle.
And I face that, especially with unions, your first question. And I actually consider pro bono as an intervention, a surgical intervention. Get in, solve, get out. And it's actually not a job completer, but a job creator. It is to make the space for a healthier organization or economy. Sometimes I'm honest about it, and sometimes that's what I need to say.
And it's a different skill set often, right? Like when you think of, I don't know if anyone is familiar with New Profit. Do folks know it? They have a graph that was in an old annual report, and we've actually replicated it, but it looks at the top 10 companies in the for-profit, looks at them 50 years ago, and looks at them today. There's only one that's similar, which is actually GE at the top. And then if you look at the nonprofit, it's the same big old organizations. So we talk a lot about innovation, but because we're not infusing the right institutional support, just New Profits in our argument, around the best nonprofits, we're actually not getting growth. So it's not really a question of, it's a question of getting the right skill sets to support, and those aren't always available in a traditional job setting.
Okay, and just before we go to the next question, for Johan's benefit, put your hand up if you want to talk about those two things to him at the next break. Uh-oh. All right, next.
Hi, so we've been talking about the pro bono movement and the speed at which it's moving. What kind of tools do you guys see, such as campaigns or venture philanthropy, do you see that we could use to help accelerate the pro bono movement?
It's a good question, and I think then the question we will have to ask to figure out what acceleration means is for whom. For individuals interested in volunteering, I think more and more than focusing in on the corporate sector and getting CEOs understanding the potential benefit in terms of talent development. For whom? The NGOs, that's a whole different conversation. Then we have to think about capacity building and what are they trying to do, and how can we give them the supports to be able to think about capacity building. One of the most challenging parts of pro bono, and I think you've hit upon this, is that there's not one stakeholder. There's often three. And the result of that is that any conversation about, well, how do we push this forward, has to always begin with, push it forward for whom, and why are we choosing that particular group? I would argue that it's always the NGOs we should focus on, because if we focus on the NGOs, everything else comes together. But that's the perspective of Taproots.
I really believe in the power of intermediaries and the crucial role of intermediaries in developing the pro bono field and the pro bono movement more widely. There is a lot of speech about a world without intermediaries, about the blockchain, about whatsoever. I believe the intermediaries have a crucial role to play in translating things, because you cannot build smart contracts between people that easily in real life. I also believe they have a role in capitalizing knowledge and transmitting knowledge, which you cannot do if you only do peer-to-peer pro bono. There is no centralization of knowledge so there is no confrontation of data as figures from different places, different angles of view. So I believe in collaboration between the intermediaries to make the movement thrive. That's really what I believe. Right. That's why we're here.
And then one last question, sorry, because we have to move on. If I see the ladies get the mic there.
It was me, yeah. So I want to get back to András's question, receptiveness of NGOs. And there was discussion whether NGOs are ready to receive pro bono or not. And I forget to introduce myself. I'm Lela Hopere from Georgia, from Center for Strategic Research and Development of Georgia. And in Georgia, it often happens that this is problem we are facing, receptiveness of NGOs. This doesn't mean that NGOs do not need pro bono because they do not have needs. They have too many needs. And it's difficult for them to scope, to narrow and identify. And it is role of intermediary to help them to scope and identify the needs. Okay, and we do a lot of work beforehand, before this pro bono program starts. But then my question comes to the period after. After the pro bono involvement is over, and what we try to do, at least I think it would be wise and good thing to do this, in some times period, deliver feedback to the companies or to pro bono volunteers, what has happened after their program was over? What change did they initiate it or caused? What did they help things to improve? And in this case, we came to the problem that NGO, this civil society organization, non-profit, that has received this pro bono program, and if it is very practical thing like new website or leaflet design or something, it's easy. But if it is more long-term consultancy, which implies the change of things, a change of processes inside the NGOs, it often happens that however happy they are and however well suited this product is to their needs, they really do not have either time or capacity, or this is inertia, to embed this change. And things are going on in a similar way, and this wonderful product, like strategy or recommendation, are still. And where our role as intermediaries ends, how do you think, or what is your experience? Should we continue working with these beneficiary organizations afterwards to help them embed these products? Because you cannot oblige companies always in all type of products to mentor implementation of the recommendations they have developed.
I understand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's perfect question. Because of what you're saying, we changed our organization entirely. Because we saw this coming, and it's a problem. What happens after is getting used, because there's a lot of strategic plans to get in drawers, and okay, no one is using. So we created a framework like that. We have all nonprofits that we work with, they start with what we call certifications, like a diagnosis in best practice internationally, plus a diagnosis of management in all HR, financial, and everything. If the organization passes this phase, they go through acceleration process. If they don't, they get to an incubation process. So it's a cycle of incubation first, then get to certificate this basic best practices, and then they go through acceleration with only one goal: try to reach self-sustainability. To reach self-sustainability, all your process must be working, and everything must be doing correctly. So with this framework, we created a way that now is working to make sure that everything that will be delivered to these nonprofits, it's a period that nonprofits stay with us, like 1 year. So get a cycle that these deliverables make sense in a plan for them to reach the future. So first we use pro bono as our cover. Now we use as the core of our engine. We create an engine to make that happen, and pro bono is in the core of it.
Time for one.
Pro bono can be a channel, so maybe you never really stop. I think we have nonprofits. We've been doing 7 or 8 projects with them over the course, and we're not going to stop if they don't want to stop. So I think it's the only time is when do they want to stop. Also, we mostly do short term project, done in a day projects, and we use this project to trigger further engagements by the employees with the non-profits, but it doesn't have to be with their company anymore. So they meet the non-profit with their company during a CSR event, and then they know the non-profit leaders, and then they can directly work with them to help them implement. And we strongly encourage that, and we try to track this a little bit. So we know that more than 2/3 of the non-profits we've been working with, they have received volunteering from the people they met during our pro bono projects, after the projects. So this is one of the answer. Second answer, and we try to implement, and it's hard, but it's with the collaboration of other intermediaries. So in France, 3 years ago, François Hollande, the French president, launched a program to basically support and accelerate non-profits, 15 non-profits every semester. And we made, I would say, a steering group of consultants for non-profits, including Pro Bono Lab and others. And we would just like share the work depending on what they needed. So because we knew, for instance, we had no expertise on strategy at that moment, and there was another company that had a better expertise on strategy. There was also, we didn't deliver a pro bono project on accountability, for instance, and there was another pro bono intermediary volunteering that would deliver that. So we would share with them, and it's the same now. So you have a focus, and if you can map your sector and say, I just take this kind of nonprofits with this kind of projects, then you leave room for other intermediaries to like take other kinds of nonprofits, other kinds of projects. And if you can cooperate, once you
More holistic.
Once you have accelerated and they go, your goal is to have this kind of pass, like at the end of it, you've lead them to somewhere, and then you pass the hand to someone else who is the guy expert to like, take it from here and bring it to another level. So
Just a quick I think you hit on why intermediaries are so critical to ensure that continuity is there. The way we've solved for that is we embed dotted line one of our staff members into the charity, and we take a board seat. So we're a venture philanthropy organization that uses pro bono as our tool, I think similar to you, to deliver our work. But our model is so embedded that we ensure that the strategy is used, there's quarterly reports, we run that, we respond to stakeholders. Like, we do a lot as an intermediary, and that ensures that both the corporates and the nonprofits, everyone's held accountable. We pick up the balls when the balls do drop, but it ensures that the work that's being done is actually driving impact and change.
Which I think works because you guys are deep dives.
Yeah.
I think for future conversation is a question of how you see success from pro bono engagements when they are 4 hours or 6 hours versus the deep dives.
Yeah, very different,
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, keep these questions percolating and going. We only have these 2 days to put those pressing questions out there to be able to speak. And what, one more?
Yeah, one
Or-
more. The last.
Antoine,
You're all standing there ready to...
Thank you for that. My name is Carolina. I'm from Norway, and I just joined Prospera Network. So this is my first time in a summit, and I'm very humble and grateful to be a part of this movement. And I had the pleasure of spending some time with Joel in Oslo before we came down here. And my question is a bit related to one of your examples where you said that if you did volunteering where you went out and did some sweeping in the street and compared the value of that to doing skill-based pro bono, you actually saw that the value could be 300 times more. And it's been fascinating to have dialogue with several of you already and get an impression of the versatileness of how we are working, both in terms of time and the perspective. And basically my question is, from your perspectives, what should be on the top of your or our priority list as intermediaries to create the most effect or value or impact? And I think the example that you gave in your keynote, Joel, where you described the opportunity for an example for Amazon when we use digitalization and a platform to leverage impact and pro bono is a good example of one focus area, but that would be really interesting to hear your take on.
Well, that's an easy one to answer, obviously. No, I think it's a great one because it gets to the focus of impact. And I think the way in which, if we're going to prioritize what is sort of the single most thing to focus in on, I would say it's how are you adding into the long-term success of the organization that you are supporting? What is your piece of the puzzle? Because we can measure hours and we can measure, value in terms of monetary value. But if we're really going to start to talk about, if we're going to scale that wall, if we're going to think about all of those puppies and awareness and all of that, we're going to need to be able to say, what's the long-term impact of this work on these organizations? And that's not an easy thing to quantify.
Measurement is always a nightmare. But for me, what will be the priority of impact will be a changing of mindset, both sides. If this happens, we have the impact done. Because if you teach me something, maybe I will forget and maybe I use. If you change my mind, I'll never forget that. There's no way back. So when we made a program last year, acceleration program, with 10 nonprofits to make them create sustainable business model, just like a startup. We made a demo day and everything. Okay, good. 1 month later, I went to visit one of these nonprofits, and then they were showing me that they realized that one program will face a lot of financial troubles for them in the long run. I never saw that. A nonprofit talked to me like that. So there was a change of mindset. They would be jeopardizing all the job because of a bad program they're going to create, and then stop that. This changed, and it's changed to the consultant. After that experience, he wants to engage and help. Here's the impact. How to measure that? We try to 6 months after our programs, talk again to the involved, get more information of what changed within the company, if new projects were implemented after the pro bono experience, if the nonprofits change the way they're running their organization. But it's really tough to measure.
Did we want to take the last question? The one.
No, sorry. We have to close it now. We're already 15 minutes.
Okay.
And we have some other kind of events to link in. So can we just wait for that question till the lunch break? Sorry, I have to be cruel. But thank you very much for the audience to be so active, and thank you for our speakers and presenters. I think we all deserve a round of applause. Well, thank you.